You're listening to Always Player One, a solo board gaming podcast.
Hello and welcome to Always Player One with me, Scruffy Gamer.
And me, Norm. Okay, so today is our very first episode, so we found it fitting to talk about how we got into solo games in the first place, and a game very important to us, which was in our journey, which was A Feast for Odin.
Yeah, every episode we'll be taking on a different topic, usually tied around a specific game, and that's what we're doing today. So yeah, let's jump right in.
Okay, so Scruffy, before we derail this podcast, before it even begins, why don't you start by telling the good people how you got involved with solo games?
Oh wow, okay. So my first kind of foray into solo gaming, it was inspired by the fact that I wanted to play lots of games, and I didn't have enough friends who were around to play games. So I was just kind of desperately trying to find a way to scratch that itch on my own. My first sort of real, I guess, purchase for a game was actually a gift. It was Robinson Crusoe, which I know is very positively reviewed, and I thought it was all right. I had a couple of good times with it, but then I really kind of fell in love with the hobby and the practice of solo gaming when I got into Feast for Odin, which is a game I don't actually own, but I was able to play on Tabletop Sim. Obviously, a wonderful program which you'll be trying out very soon, hopefully. It's a mod by Error, the one I use. It's absolutely beautiful mod, lovely table. I did a playthrough of it today, which I've uploaded to my YouTube channel, hopefully, when this all comes out. And yeah, it's just a fantastic game. Like I forgot how much I enjoyed it. It was a bit nostalgic going back through it again last night when I played it. But yeah, everything about it is just such crunchy decisions. I don't know. I feel like I've hogged the mic enough. What about you?
Okay, thank you. So, well, first of all, how did your playthrough go? Did you
Oh yeah, it was quite good. I had a run of luck, sort of in the mid game. I decided to go for long ships this time. Just kind of fell into that. Drew a job that involved long ships, and I've actually never taken two long ships on before. But wow, that was quite nice because there's one square where you can, if you've got two long ships, just take the biggest tile in the game, and yeah, it's really powerful, really good. I managed to get 103 in the end, which I was quite happy with. Yeah, it was really nice. I think I made a few sort of suboptimal plays towards the end, but yeah, definitely. I had a lot of good pillaging rolls. I had a few lucky hunts as well.
nice?
It was nice.
This highlights an issue with the podcast just going forward that we're going to have to keep tracks on. Is Scruffy tends to make up words for things that exist in board games. So when he says job, he means an occupation card, I'm assuming.
Yes, yeah. I made reference to that in my video. That I often call things that I called the ale in it horns. I caught myself a few times, but I'm sure I didn't catch myself all the time.
We're going to have to leave a dictionary underneath each show note for every weird word you use. I think that's how our listeners are gonna get through this.
Yeah, I do tend to get told off when I play games with Norm and a few others.
Yeah. So how did I get involved in solo games? Well, that's a great question. So basically, I got into gaming quite late on. I started playing modern board games in 2016, and the reason the reason I started playing solo games sort of came out of similar circumstance to yourself, Scruffy.
Mm-hmm.
It was sort of necessity. So I think when you get into the hobby in general, as a new person in the hobby, you start collecting, or at least I did. I started collecting every game I thought I would like, which is a lot. And I've heard it described before that you run into one of three walls. One is time. One is time to play the games. One is money. You run out of money to spend on the games. Another one is space. And I kind of hit every one of those walls after about a year in the hobby. Um, so I had to make sure that the games that I was purchasing after that were going to get played and get played easily. So I started seeing posts on various board game groups about solo games, and I thought that's probably a good idea to invest in some of those. And the first one I got was Mansions of Madness
Hmm.
Second Edition. And you know the one with the app, the Arkham series.
Yeah, how did you find that?
It was good. Yeah, it exceeded all my expectations of what a solo game was about because I sort of had this idea that I just sort of feel
Oh, yeah,
a bit
it can feel very
crap.
lonely, can't it? When you sit down, you set up your table. There's nothing more kind of. It feels almost a little bit embarrassing, or I don't know. I felt a bit shy the first time I set up a table for myself, and
Yeah, it feels
yeah,
very unnatural because you're sort of told that board games are a social experience, which of course they are, but that's also nonsense
well,
because
yeah. I mean,
solo
board
games
games they're not
have
just
been
a social; they can absolutely be a solo experience. It feels very meditative when I pull out a game and start playing with it or fiddle around on tabletops. Then for me, anyway,
yeah.
you know.
And I kind of thought that the only solo games I would enjoy would be ones that tell me a story because, and that's why I went for a narrative-driven experience like Mansions
Mm.
of Madness, uh, because I thought, well, if I'm not besting an opponent, then
Yeah,
what
that's
is the
exactly
point?
why I
But
picked asked for Robinson Crusoe and was lucky enough to be gifted it. It's to try and
um,
it was almost like a substitute for reading a book, going on an
mhm.
adventure, um, delving into a bit of immersion, and yeah, it was only the Feast for Odin that got me into sort of strategy games solo. I've never really thought of that kind of divide there, almost a dichotomy between the two. I mean, obviously, it's not binary. You can have a strategy game that's immersive and storytelling, but yeah, definitely, it scratches different itches, doesn't it? It's
Yeah, no, absolutely, and the same thing happened with me. So the reason I started playing a bunch of Feast for Odin solo, and I was going through all my Feast for Odin bits before the show just to refresh myself with it, and I found the first score pad that we filled in when we played multiplayer. It was myself, you, and
mm,
a friend of ours, um, and you scored 106 in your very first play of Feast for
I've
Odin,
only gotten
which
worse.
I think. um, but do you know what I scored? Do you remember at all? Just do you want to
Let's have
guess?
a go. I guess you scored. Well, I mean, no, it would be rude to guess. Go on, you tell me.
You'd
It would only
be
be
rude to
rude
guess.
because I guess low. I guess.
Yes, and I did. I scored extremely low. I scored 35 when you won.
Wow.
So
Okay, I was gonna guess about 60-ish. I
yeah.
don't know why. I was
Oh,
like,
so you would have thought better of me. That wouldn't have been Um, no, and that's why I started playing solo because I remember feeling, I just bought this game and I am terrible at it.
oh yeah, I remember when because you were the first one to really dive into solo in our sort of gaming group that I know of, and I remember thinking it was like I could imagine in my head a Rocky montage of you picking up Feast for Odin and pushing to the limit, trying to train and get great at the game.
Well, that is exactly what I was doing, and what I found is that I loved it. I really enjoyed it, and I thought what I was enjoying was the fact I was getting better at the game. But then what happened is when we had when we did NormCon for the first time. So just so you guys are aware as listeners, myself, Scruffy Gamer, and a few of our friends in our gaming group, we run a yearly convention for charity. It's the first one was held in my flat, so it was called NormCon, and the name hasn't changed. So, um, but yeah. So when we ran our first NormCon, I played a four-player game of Feast Rodin, and this was on the back of playing it solo about 5 or 6 times. And I remember thinking, I would rather be playing this solo than with these other three people because the time it took to go to get to my
The great thing about solo games is you don't have to wait for your turn. You know, you might have to quickly process a dummy, but you're doing that, and for the rest of it, you're just playing. You're always player one. It's fantastic.
I like what you did there.
Roll credit.
No, but seriously, and it's not that I wasn't having a good time because I was having a really good time. But I remember thinking this plays so much faster. It plays the choices are just as, if not more, interesting because of the way it works. And we'll come to that in a second when we start
Mm.
talking about it. But yeah, that was when I first realised. I think I as well as a gamer, I'm also a solo gamer, and I do enjoy playing games solo. And games can be better on your own than in a group, which is something when I first purchased Mansions of Madness to play solo, I didn't think that I would come to that conclusion. And yeah, which is why I think it's important for us to talk about Feast today because it's quite important in our journey. But moving on from then, obviously we've grown, but we are. I think you'd agree with me. Um, we're still quite new to the solo gaming hobby. Would you agree with that?
I'd say, yeah. I mean, I've been playing board games for like my whole life, but yeah, solo gaming has only been really kicking off for me this last year, or maybe a bit longer. Yeah, I haven't been solo gaming for very long at all. It does feel like a whole new world, so it's quite exciting to be talking about it in this podcast. And I have to say, this will be a really nice way to get suggestions from you guys listening and try out some new games that we might not have already tried. Um, we've got a few games lined up that we're already very invested in. No spoilers here.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm very much interested to see what who listens to the show. They're probably going to be more experienced in solo games than us, which is cool because we'll get to learn from them, try out some of their games, maybe even react to those on the show. But I'm also excited for. I think there's going to be a lot of new solo gamers given the current circumstances.
oh yeah, yeah.
I think a lot of people in quarantine are going to find themselves wanting to have a tactile experience with a board game that they can't have unless they play solo. Unless,
Yeah.
of course, they have a gaming family, and then you know,
Well, even then, I think sometimes, I come from a bit of a gaming family, and sometimes you do just want to have a bit of alone time, and short of reading a book or playing a video game, doing the puzzles the only real tactile thing there, isn't it? And
yeah,
puzzles are all right, but sometimes you want to have the thrill of a board game all to yourself.
no, absolutely. So what I'm saying is, I think it'll be fun for these new people coming into the hobby, which I definitely anticipate. They have a show where two people are discovering the hobby at the same time as
Mm.
so that's pretty cool. But yeah, that's kind of how I got into solo gaming. I've kind of moved on to um, both of us have kind of moved on to other solo games. I now own a few games that are solo only, which again is something I didn't think I would have. Um,
Mm. Yeah,
and yeah, I'm having an absolute blast with it.
that's awesome. So yeah, so let's jump back into talking a little bit more about Feast for Odin, shall we?
Yeah,
Um, I think it's an absolutely wonderful game. I mean, the playthrough I had yesterday, you start off with this kind of tapestry of choices, and then you just sort of slowly eliminate them as you go through the game. I remember the first turn I was taking in the thing, I was kind of a bit overwhelmed. I was a bit like, well, I don't know. The first worker I place is going to determine the rest of my game. I mean, the only kind of bit arrow you have, the only kind of pointer you have, is your first occupation card that you draw, um, and then from there you're kind of like let loose. I decided quite early, well, I don't want to look at animals this time because I did animals last time I played, and I don't know, but other than that, let's see what happens. And yeah, and then as soon as you start diving in and doing things, you fall into a kind of a pattern and know, well, actually now I need to get this. I needed ore for my ships, so I've got to make that happen. And I want to then look at emigrating my ships. How can I make that happen? And it's really fun when you set yourself your little goals, your little tasks, and yeah. Yeah,
Yeah, and
that was my experience with it anyway.
yeah,
Was
no, I completely agree. I think just before we get started, if you haven't played Feast for Odin, if you haven't worked out already, it is a worker placement game. Um,
mm,
it's really unique in that it's worker placement, but on your own player board, you generate income through tile placement, and the whole purpose of what your workers are doing are to make you better at getting the tiles you need to go onto your player board. It's very quickly. It's designed by Uwe Rosenberg, and it was published in 2016. So just for a little bit of context, if you haven't played the game, that's the sort of game we're talking about. But yeah, to build on what you said there, um, yeah, it's when Scruffy says there's a plethora of choices. There's 60. I think there's 62. I haven't got it on my show notes or anything, so apologies for that. But I think it's 62 action spaces to choose from,
that
um,
sounds about right. Yeah, yeah. I
which
mean, a lot of them are variations on the same thing, but oof,
yeah,
it's a
I
lot.
mean, when you like you said, when you see it, you think, "Oh gosh, right. Oh, it's been a while since I played. What do I? How do I win? What do I
One of the great things though is that you only start off with
mean?"
something like 5 workers. It might be 6. I just played it yesterday, and
I
can't
think
even
it's
remember.
six. You start with five
Um,
in your thing square, and then you move
and then you
your
you
Viking.
have one come in, and you just gradually add more and more workers as you go throughout the game. You kind of have 2 different sets of workers and take it in turn, sending them to the spaces, and you pick up more and more, which means you get to do more and more as you go out along in the game, which is kind of exciting. So you only get a few choices at first, a few spaces you can take, and then you by the end of the game are like, well, I can take every space. But
Um,
you need to. You're at that point. You're like, well, I've got loads of things I need to do, and you never have quite enough workers to do everything you want. You know.
yeah, absolutely. And I think when you said about how it narrows the choice down for you, Feast Rodan does this really cool thing where it when you place a worker, you choose how many you send. So you can place between 1 to 4 workers a turn. Um, and what's really cool about that is, like Scruffy said, a lot of the action spaces are variations on a theme, and the
Mm.
more workers you send, the more powerful the action is. Um, but
Sometimes,
obviously, yeah,
sometimes it's the same square just with more workers. But
yeah,
you're right. Like if there's for example, the emigration one, where if you send 2 workers, it'll be you emigrate. If you send 3 workers, you'll emigrate and you'll get to draw a card. There's only one square, I think, where it's exactly the same. It just costs one more worker. Um, and the reason for that is that you can be blocked from certain spaces. So in multiplayer, that works by if another player takes it. But in solo player, it works by if you took it last turn, you can't take it in the turn you're in. Your other set of workers blocks the spaces, which I think is a beautiful little mechanic. Um,
yeah. I
I don't know
think
how you feel about that, Norm, but to me, it makes you feel like cross it yourself sometimes. Like, why did I take that space the turn before? I need it now. I should have known I'd need it. It's
yeah,
a
and
lovely only got yourself to blame moment, which a lot of good solo games do.
yeah, and it does that in a really simple way. The game makes you play with 2 different colors of meeples.
Mm.
One you use you use them in alternating turns, and the ones you used from the previous round remain on the board and just block you, um, which is lovely because you can somewhat well you can plan for it. Um, but it asks you to plan ahead in a way that the multiplayer game might not as much. It also
Yeah.
makes it harder because I feel like a Feast Rodent really rewards you for being good at taking a certain action, with the occupation cards. So in multiplayer, you tend to want to do the same thing um, every turn
Yeah.
um,
Makes sense. Yeah.
to an extent, where in the solo game it restricts you from doing that. So you kind of have to diversify a little bit more, which is really fun. It's really really fun. So yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's one of the reasons why it works so well as a solo game, because that's not a difficult rule to implement. That's not work. It doesn't. There's no AI.
Yeah, you sacrifice flexibility for certainty, don't you? So in a multiplayer game, you could take the same square theoretically every turn if you're lucky. But in solo play, you can't do that. But you know what you're going to get. Whereas in multiplayer, you don't know what the other players are going to wall off from you. Um, so in a lot of ways, I prefer that because it kind of takes away that one random element that is the other player,
Mhm.
um, which is nice. You know how I have a bit of aversion to randomness in games sometimes.
That was a lovely segue, Scruffy, because I actually wanted to bring up the randomness in
Mm,
East Rodin. So
yeah, yeah. I mean, I've mentioned before how I have a bit of trouble with that.
yeah, so for the listeners, I think you'll find that I am a little bit more forgiving of randomness in games out of the two hosts. But why don't you go ahead and tell the listeners?
So the biggest thing I have trouble with, and I feel bad for saying it after the recording last night, where I was absolutely just a lucky fella. I got so many lucky rolls, as you'll see if you watch the YouTube video. Um, but the way the randomness works is when there are two different actions, um, hunting, which includes whaling, or raiding, which includes pillaging, and the squares for them involve you to roll a dice, and you can increase or decrease the value of that dice a little bit, so you have some influence over it. But it does involve investing resources, which means you are investing more money. Or if you get lucky, you just get a bigger number. One of the dice is a D8, one of them is a D12, and so that's quite a swingy number. For hunting, you need to get as low a number as possible. For raiding or pillaging, you need to get as high a number as possible. And you get three chances, sure, but all three of those rolls could be terrible, or all three could be great. There's kind of an interesting push of luck thing where if you roll kind of a mediocre roll, you can keep that and work with what you just rolled, or you can risk it and try and roll big. But that's the only kind of interesting decision there. And if it feels absolutely horrible if you get three bad rolls in a row. Um, it's kind of nothing worse than like, I really need to get a good pillage now. I've got all my things lined up, and then you fail and you get nothing. That's my personal opinion on it. I just find it a little bit heartbreaking sometimes. A little bit like you've got this wonderful strategy game, and it's got this one janky mechanic in it that doesn't quite seem to match everything else.
Well,
Um,
I also think Feast Rodin has a little bit of a janky mechanic, but I don't think it's a dice rolling, and I'll come on to that later in the show. Um, I'm a real big fan of the dice rolling in the Feast Rodin. I think the push your luck thing is really, really cool. And one thing you didn't mention there, you said, "Oh, if you fail, you get nothing." Well, that's not very true because you do get quite. I think you get quite well compensated in many.
Well, because all right, okay. So you sometimes get your guys back, and you get like a free weapon or a bit of wood or whatever. You've always pretty much invested one of your guys for a bit of wood, which is very rarely what you need. And
Well,
if you wanted that, there's other spaces to get it better.
okay. But wood is what you use to manipulate the die in future turns, so you get better at taking that action. So instead of being put off by failing, the game very much encourages you to try again, which I think is really cool. What
I've never thought of it that way. Yeah, that makes sense. That's
and
quite.
another thing I think is really really cool about a die rolling, especially in solo play, is we were talking about how you exchange flexibility for certainty when you go into a solo game, because you know where your workers are going to be from turn to turn, and you know what spaces are going to be blocked. Well, sometimes you can kind of plan. Well, the blue team are going to be my raiding party, and the yellow team they're going to be my trading party, and sometimes I don't know, or let's say your blue team, your hunting party. This is a much better example. We should should definitely have gone with this the first time. The blue team, your hunting party. The yellow team are like your traders who convert your goods into better tiles, for example.
Mhm.
Um, and then you fail a roll, and you have to take one of your workers back, and you haven't planned for where you're going to put that worker. Well, what are you going to do?
It does feel really nice when you've got that extra little guy that you didn't. I don't know what I'm going to do with. What am I going to do with this? And then you kind of find a new little exciting avenue for what to do with them.
And I think it creates a really a small and interesting wrinkle as to, you know, oh yeah, I do know where all my workers are going to be, but do you? Are you able to perfectly plan for that? Maybe you're going to get one of those workers back, and actually you're going to have to put them somewhere you didn't maybe want to put them there this time. It's good because it doesn't feel like a punishment. You're kind of getting them back, but at the same time you're kind of like, oh, this isn't what I planned for. I am I going to block a space I didn't want to block for next turn? You know, I
Mm.
plan because you can very much at the start of your turn plan exactly where you're going to put all your workers, and I think it creates a real nice level of uncertainty, which is very, very minor and feels like a very strategic game, but also it's not a perfect puzzle. It is something that can throw small wrinkles at you, and I think the die rolling is just really nice for that.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right with saying that it's not a perfect puzzle because the one thing you do want to avoid is having a solved game, don't you? Where there's an optimal way to play. Um, I think the occupation cards help with that to some extent because every game you're going to be drawing a different starting occupation. Every time you pick up a new occupation card, it's going to be slightly different. So that might they do have quite a big impact on the game. But if you had a game plan that worked every time to get you like an exact score, that, that would feel a bit like it's taking something away from it. So maybe that random is essential.
Well, people are going to start to think this is scripted now because that's exactly what I do think is quite janky. Is the occupation cards?
Huh.
I really
Well, you know why that is, and I always choose to play with the C cards because I feel like every time I draw one of those C occupation cards, they're wonderful. If I play with the B or the A occupation cards, because at the start of the game you get to pick which deck to put in your setup. I know that one of our friends uses all three mixed together, which I don't know if that's
I
that's the way to do it. But every time I pick up any of the A or Bs, I feel like this is rubbish. This doesn't fit. This feels like it doesn't quite work. It's janky. It's off. It puts me in a bad mindset. Whereas if I pick up a C, it's always ooh, that's I could do. Ooh, that's quite nice.
my regret is I always almost every time I play a Feast for Odin, um, at some point I pick up an occupation card that I would have liked to pick up at a different time, earlier, later. You know, I always feel like at some point this this card is useful. I can see its usefulness, but not now. And sometimes you develop a strategy which means that you set up your whole infrastructure to ignore, I don't know, animal breeding, and then you draw an animal breeding card with 2 rounds left in the game.
It's funny you should say that because I pulled up like the second round of the game. I pulled up a occupation as I bought a longship that required you have two longships, an X amount of longships filled with ore to get a massive reward. I was just like, well, I guess fortune really did favour me in that Feast for Odin playthrough. It was absolutely spot on and perfect. So
Mm,
moments like that are really great. But I mean, it does mean that every playthrough you're going to have different opportunities to get a high score.
correct.
Um, and that opportunity isn't dependent on what you do as a player. It's dependent on luck of the draw or luck of the dice. And so that's something that feels sort of out of place in Feast for Odin, which for the rest of it isn't that sort of chaos in a game. I think it does always feel a bit surprising when you get bad luck with a card you draw. It feels like, oh, I feel a bit hurt by you, Feast Road, and you didn't. You've been a nice chilled out strategy game up until this.
No, I completely agree. But you're in your example there of everything going perfectly with the card pool. The chances of you rolling exactly what you need on a D8 compared to drawing from that big deck, it's a lot more swingy. The deck is much more swingy than the
Hmm.
than the die. But
I think it's that I don't pin much on the occupation cards. So I don't when I take, because the easiest way to get the occupation cards in the game, I think, is to take a an action where you send free workers,
and you get to do
um,
it as a bonus. Yeah, I
and
agree.
then it's just a bonus. Whereas when you're going to hunt or whale or anything that involves rolling the dice, that is the specific action you're taking for that turn. So if you fail at that action, it feels a lot worse to me than if you draw a card that's not particularly useful to you, because, well, I wasn't going there for that card. I was going there to buy the boat, for example.
Okay. Okay.
That's how it feels for me.
No, I get that completely. Have you played the expansion?
No, have you?
I haven't, but I was looking at it, and I've been looking at it for a while, and it does something interesting, I think, with the cards. It does a couple of interesting things. When I was doing my research for the show, I was kind of I was kind of convincing myself to buy the expansion
Nice.
because it seems really cool. So the expansion came out like 2 years after it was released in 2018, and
Mhm.
it adds a bunch of new things. But two things that I think are really cool is it adds, as well as a starting occupation, a random starting building as well. And
Oh
the
yeah.
starting building is not included in the base game, a new for the expansion, and they have two sides, and you decide in only in game which side you're going to use, um,
Mhm.
which I think is lovely to give you send you on a different path, because it can be very easy to do the same thing over and over. But another thing it does is it has these victory point tokens, and you can if you don't want to play an occupation card, but you have the opportunity to, you can instead discard a occupation card and pick up a victory point tokens, and they're worth initially 4 points each, and then when all the 4 point victory tokens go, they're worth 3 points, and then when they go, etc. So I think that's a really cool mitigation of that sort of janky feeling that we've been talking.
Yeah, that makes sense. Turning them into points. That's
Yeah.
interesting.
So that sounds really cool. It also adds, I don't want to spend too much time talking about the expansion because we haven't played it, but also adds additional resources, and it. Um,
Yeah, I mean, we'll have to revisit it for our 100th episode or something. We'll see.
um, I got the feeling that it sounds really cool, so I got the feeling I might be revisiting it a lot sooner.
It's a bit sooner than that, yeah.
A bit sooner than that, yeah, absolutely. Okay, so moving on from the randomness, um, are you aware of the solo challenges on Board Game Geek for this game?
Oh no, what are they?
So there, so when it first came out, people were rightfully so excited about this as a solo game,
Mm-hmm.
and there are on Board Game Geek some challenges, and they tell you how to precede the occupation deck, um, and they tell you what starting occupation you get, and they give you slightly different rules to play with. That sometimes the dice work in different ways. Sometimes certain actions work slightly differently.
Okay.
And someone has kindly gone ahead and put this in a booklet, a PDF booklet. Um, we will link this in the show notes if you want to give it a go yourself. And it has a 15 scenario campaign of these challenges, with a little like narrative paragraph about what's going on with your clan, and you have to lead them over these 15 challenges, which I thought was really cool. Um, and I haven't played yet, but I'm absolutely going to give some of those a try because I think
Yeah, that sounds amazing.
also you can compare your score and know that you have a proper comparative score, because
Mm.
we had the exact same circumstances and preceded decks and stuff. So that's really cool. So I said 15-page scenario. It's actually a 16 scenario solo campaign. But
Wow.
yeah, so that's something that's really cool. Do you think you'll give any of those?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, that sounds great. I'd love to record some of them and pop them up on my channel when I get that up and running. That's yeah, it's very exciting. Kind of an interesting sort of segue into opening up back up to the nature of solo gaming and how flexible it is for that you can engage on a level of seeing it as a story, seeing it's quite relaxing, just a little puzzle to do, a bit of a brain cruncher. But you can also be very competitive, competitive with yourself and competitive with looking at high scores, trying to see if you can get a world record and things like that. I find that to be a really interesting side of solo gaming, that the level of which you can engage with, how seriously you want to take it, how much um, I guess the word would be competitive investment you want to put into your solo gaming. It's very much up to you, and I think it's a very, in some ways it's more, it's easier to get into that than multiplayer competitive, if that makes sense,
Yeah,
because there are so many online resources and so many different groups. I know that on Facebook, for example, there's a whole solo gaming group where a lot of different high scores are being posted constantly, and I find that really interesting. That's something I'm very, very tempted to get into myself.
yeah,
Um,
and shout out to the Solo Board Game Facebook group. If you're not a part of that and you have any sort of interest in solo board games, which I'm assuming you do if you're listening to the podcast, then you should jump onto the Solo Board Gaming Facebook group. Lovely people, incredibly helpful. Lots of resources there for you guys to explore. Yeah, just shout out to them. That's a really good point. But yeah, no, absolutely. It's interesting how you could see it as a relaxing, an unwinding um, way to spend your time. But yeah, you're absolutely right. You can you know take it a little bit more seriously, a little bit more competitively. And I think that's really cool. It is a very flexible hobby, and that's really cool. And I
It
think
reminded me a lot of speed running video games. It made me think of when you try and beat your own time in a video game, and it made me feel very similarly to how when I did a bit of speed running in the past. It felt a lot like that. There's an interesting sort of tie in there between the two hobbies. I think it's nice. It's nice to see. Um,
yeah, and I think that's exactly how I play solo games. Is I'll get hung up on a game, and
mm,
I'll play it like 15 times, and then and then I'll move on to something else, and want to keep coming back and do better and better and better. Or at
There's
least,
something about wanting to beat your own top score that is it's very compelling.
yeah.
Because the first time you do it and you get a score that you're kind of happy with, but you're like, well, I could do better than that. I could easily do better than that. And then you do, and it just gets harder and harder and harder to do better than your last score. And you start having games where you're like, oh, I'm so annoyed that I didn't get anywhere near my top score. Am I just getting worse? But then you do beat it again, and that's such a thrilling moment for me, anyway. I'm sure for others as well. Um,
So, final word on Feast for Odin. If someone was looking at this just for a solo experience and they had nobody else to play Feast for Odin with, would you recommend it?
100%.
Yeah. So, it's a fantastic solo experience. If you're just looking to buy it for that, then yeah, don't don't
Yeah.
don't let anyone take you out of it.
Absolutely wonderful. I mean, it's not a particularly lightweight game. I wouldn't say it was a gateway game, whatever that means. But I would say it's not particularly heavy either. It's not like next level heavy. Once you've got the rules, that you'll have to look up in the appendix now and again for what some of the occupation cards are. I had to on my playthrough yesterday because some of it can be a little bit arcane to understand. But the actual rules for the game is once you got it, you got it. It's a brilliant game. 100% recommend.
And a touch on the complexity. It's a game you can very quickly jump in, and if you do get stuck on what a particular occupation card does, for example, there is an appendix in the it comes in the base game, and it has a list of every single card function. So
Mm.
if you do get stuck, it's very easy to navigate your way around. It has a really good rule book, in my opinion.
So that brings us towards the end of the podcast. And at this point in every episode, we will be asking questions to you listeners and commenting on your answers. Obviously, this being the first episode, we don't have any answers to comment on, but we will throw out a couple of questions to you. So, what are the questions this episode? Right, we have question one. How did you get interested in solo games? And question two, what are your favorite games, favorite solo games, if you have one?
Yeah, so
And
you
if you don't have a favorite game, what are you looking forward to trying?
yeah. You've heard our stories. I think it's only fair that we hear yours. So if you are
Hmm.
already into solo game or interested in solo games, you want to know how you got there. And if you've been playing for a while or at all, you want to know your favorite solo game. And if you're just starting on your solo adventure, then we want to know what games you're excited about trying. If we played, we might even be able to tell you if it's worth it or not.
Yeah, I mean, feel free to comment anything else. If you've got any games you want us to cover in the podcast, and we'd love to hear from you. Give us some suggestions. Like I say, we've got a few lined up that we're keen to get episodes in for.
Yeah.
Where can they comment, Norm?
So yeah, you can find us on Facebook. You can also find us on Instagram. You can also go ahead and follow myself. I'm on Instagram. My name on there is @MageNorm, and I think you can find Scruffy.
I'm on there too, at Scruffy Gamer.
Bro. But yeah, find us.
Links are all going to be in the description for this. Facebook, Instagram, where you can comment, how you can message.
Yeah, you can also email us, and you will have the link to our email address. So you can just copy that over, rather than frantically writing it down now.
We expect to release every fortnight wherever possible, so you can expect us to read your answers to the questions in the episodes when they're released.
Absolutely. And one thing I'm really looking forward to, I don't know about yourself, Scruffy, but I really, really want, when people write to us their favourite games and stuff, I really want to know, A, how many of these have we played, and B, how many of these are we sleeping on? Is there this like hidden treasure trove of solo games that we haven't experienced that we're that we're going to be sort of exposing ourselves to? So that's going to be really
time. I'm really excited. I don't know about you. I'm really excited.
And also, please feel
having an excuse to play more games.
Please also feel free to send in any corrections. If any of us have said anything incorrectly, then yeah, feel free to send them over. I don't think we messed up too much, but
but if you like pointing out mistakes, then do check out my YouTube channel.
Well, that's everything for episode 1. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Norm.
And I'm Scruffy Gamer.
Thank you for listening. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode of Always Player One. Until then, reach out on Facebook, Instagram, or by email to keep the conversation going.